very excited to invite our 5 very distinguished panelists for this evening. And they are Amit Bohensky, Andrew McKay, Jeffrey Hill, George Kasabji, and Michael Nelson. So I'm going to ask each panelist to quickly again introduce themselves, give their name again, the company they work for, their expertise, and their interest in analytics. So let's start left to right. My left. Sorry.
Hi. I'm Jeff Hill. I'm with Humedica. Our business is kind of taking data from healthcare providers and giving it back to them in a form that they can make useful decisions on. And it turns out that a lot of that data that they have is locked up in free text dictated notes. And so we have a group at Humedica that basically tries to take the free text and turn it back into structured data so that people can take action on it. Surprisingly, for example, or maybe not surprising if you're familiar with our healthcare system, all of the coded data that we have was designed for billing purposes, not really for healthcare purposes. So a lot of the data that is important for your healthcare is actually only in the notes itself.
Hello, good evening. My name is Amit Bohensky. I recently sold my startup Focal Info to an American company called Variant. We were in the field that is called web intelligence. I'm doing extraction of information from the web from unstructured sources all my life. And after you start this information, you need to union it, it's called ETL, to metrics and to get conclusions. I'm proud to say that I use the technology that Basis are offering, and it gives us a very, very big benefit. Today I'm the CEO of my other company. It's called Zoomed. We are producing widgets that we put on the publishers, on the website, and we are trying to discover what other information we can push to the reader. And again, we are using text analytics technology for that.
My name is Andrew McKay. I'm one of the founders of Kona DataSearch. We have a search product for the Salesforce community. We're focusing on searching every object, every field in Salesforce, plus connectors to other sources in the Salesforce layout. And we produce an awful lot of analytics and analytical results within that set simply because of the demand of the Salesforce customer. We're totally completely in the cloud. And I've been in the search industry since 2001, I guess, from Fast Search and Transfer, and then Activio, and now Kona. And you asked, what is our talent?
What is your interest in text analytics? Our talents, whichever.
I do play back.
Bad.
So the text analytics side, of course, what's interesting about the Salesforce community is that Salesforce is a highly structured environment, predominantly populated with text. So it's either the best of all worlds or the worst of all worlds. So the demands in that space are quite interesting, especially where search and BI come together. And there's not really a distinction between the two of them much anymore. So that's what we do.
Thank you. Mike Nelson. I run Advanced Discovery's East Coast Operations and EVP Managing Director. My background is in corporate litigation. I was in-house with MetLife for many years during a great turn when e-discovery, what we provide, went from paper to digital, which was an exciting thing to take on, because then coming into the text analytics conversations, I really understand where it came from and where it's going. What we do is we provide litigation technology to AM 100 law firms, Fortune 500 companies, and we collect, we process, and we host data for some of the largest litigations and investigations in the world. With that, you see the largest data sets coming from all different sources, which I'm sure we'll talk about more tonight. And that's how we try to apply now text analytics, to kind of learn that data, cull that data down, but from the source and understanding the companies, like I did at MetLife.
George Kasabji with Luminoso. Our solutions enable you, companies, to derive insights about your brand, about your customers, about your products, globally, worldwide, across many different languages. So you're deriving insights from the written language that's used to describe your product and your brand, etc. And we do this without the need for creating dictionaries. We do this without the need for large training sets, or without the need to translate to other languages. So we're really obsessed with enabling you to derive insights from free-form text.
Great, so let me just tell you what the format's going to be like tonight. Real quickly, we're going to do a round-robin series of questions, which each panelist is asked. Each panelist can answer the same question. And then we're going to do some questions we had submitted by email, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So, sounds like it's going to get harder and harder, so I'm going to start with an easy one. So the first question is, what are some of the more exciting, current, real-world applications of text analytics that we're seeing at the moment, now, right now? Not in the future, but actually now. What are some of the more exciting things we're seeing? And who wants to start? You all get a turn.
In our market, our clients are Salesforce clients, and so wherever Salesforce is and the vertical application that's built on top of Salesforce, there's a desire to have a good analytical and search environment. One specific one that we sell a lot in is in recruiting. So in the recruiting space, it's a very simple model. I need to match jobs, or candidates to job orders and job orders to candidates. Now I can go to a search page and I can type in all the wonderful Boolean logic that I need to type in to find the right set of results, but the truth is they really just have a match button. And you go to a job order and say, find me the best candidates that fit this. The analytics there is interesting because what you're looking at is not just information in their CVs or resumes and any data that's been collected in the profile of that person, especially over time, and that's where the temporal piece comes in. As people collect this information about that person over time, there's some change in that person's career and their jobs, and that temporal shift is something that needs to be included within the analytical framework. But in the end, what you're trying to do is you're trying to build a composite model on each of these different possible candidates, then matching to the model that's on the job order. And you want to do it both directions. So that's one example area that we've done a lot of work.
Great example.
So obviously, as we see these companies grow and marketing themselves and internal marketing and the way their databases are set up, these big mergers and acquisitions, taking on new databases, global databases that are different languages, text analytics really ties into the litigations because all this information is put out there in the public. So you have the public social media that we have that we never had before. It's sort of AOL check, right? Everybody, I think, knew that. And did not realize it was going to become such a business acumen. And then you have these corporations trying to save money. They have these large data sets, and they're trying to not give out too much of their information out there in these litigations. And then you have the companies trying to capitalize on the cost. So how do you tackle that? You know, you're taking all these different sources, whether it be, a phone is now the size of a hard drive of a laptop, right? 64 gigabytes in an iPhone. So you get all that data. Most of it you don't need. Maybe it's relevant to a litigation. Text analytics is really, and the concepts within text analytics are really giving you an idea of the future, how to apply it to this data set, cull it down, and organize it. It's all unstructured, but then you have this metadata information in emails, documents, and whatnot. And how do you tie it together, and how do you make sense of it? And that's really what we've been trying to do in eDiscovery. You know, there's these large merger and acquisition second requests that companies overseas are doing really well buying U.S. companies, and there's a lot of information that is in all different languages. We're trying to figure out a correlation between that data without using a lot of humans to look at that data. That costs a lot of money, but the leaders that understand this data to really make those seed sets, and that's really what we do. We try and find that pure seed set organically, and then replicate that success through text analytics.
One very simple example that also illustrates how transformative text analytics can be is the processing of surveys. Everyone understands surveys. Every company does surveys, both internally and externally, to understand what's going on. But surveys tend not to be so focused on free-form responses, and yet that's where most of the potential insight is. That's where most of the value is, as opposed to the checkbox, the Likert scale checkboxes, right? So if you don't have a text analytics solution at your disposal to process the free-form responses as well as the checkboxes, then you're going to really only spot check those or really not do anything with them, and they're not going to be a centerpiece of your survey. So by being able to process multiple languages, very large scale, survey responses with the free-form text in them, what actually happens is there's a transformation where you begin to do more with the free-form text. You begin to ask more from your customers about what would you change about this product? What didn't you like about it? What did you like about the product that you switched to? And the insights derived from the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of responses there. It might be in Chinese, it might be in Spanish. There's real jewels in there. So text analytics does what we would take for granted with surveys as human beings. Does it at scale, and it transforms the potential of running surveys. So that I think is an easy example that highlights what's possible.
Right. Yep.
I want to give you an example that is coming from the field of entity extraction or entity resolution. In my previous company, what we did, we would scan hundreds of thousands of web pages without knowing exactly which pages we were bring. So they were not mapped actually. So you get pages of forums, blogs, parts of public Facebook, articles. And what we would need to do when we are investigating a problem it can be a place, can be an event, can be a person, we would need somehow to union all this information that is totally unstructured and unmapped. So what would you do when you have hundreds of thousands of pages doing that? That's where text analytics can help you. Imagine that a name can appear in a few languages and you need to find the common denominator of this name. An event, you need to find association between one place to another. And then in the end you need to find like a map, like a link analysis that will map all those contacts and will help you, all those connections will help you to reach some type of a conclusion. Without text analytics, this would not possible to be done at all.
Actually, the most exciting thing going on in this field of both language understanding and text analytics is the effect it's all having on our personal lives. Like I got myself here by talking to my car, all right? When I forgot to date this thing a week ago, I talked to Siri. You know, if you type into Google, like what's the height of the Empire State Building, you don't just get web pages, it actually gives you the answer. And I hope everybody here got a chance to see IBM's Watson thing become the Jeopardy champion. So there's just a tremendous amount of this technology which is kind of leaking into our everyday life already. And I expect to see more and more of that accelerate in the near future.
Excellent answers, gentlemen. So next question, one I'm sure many of our audience here are anxious to hear about, as am myself. So we hear a lot about text analytics and advances in it, but what do you think is really holding it back, the adoption of text analytics? Is it knowledge and expertise, clarity, leadership, vision, business value, domain adoption? What is, in your opinion, is kind of holding back the next big leap forward in text analytics, or at least the adoption of it anyway? Yep.
It takes time. So I mentioned that I was involved in 2 companies. Every company has different demands, and every demand dictates different types of rule sets and different type of learning. When you are taking a lot of data and data sets are very big from various web pages, it's one part. But what happens when you need to analyze tweets? Or what happens when you need to analyze smaller text or not? Is a different teaching. Both of them are possible. But the problem is complex, and then from one company to another, the adoption is different adoption. So there isn't like one type of rule-based what to do, or one type of sets of tools that will solve all your problem. And I think that because of that, it's still hard to adopt that type of technologies. This I'm talking as a user now.
Well, companies have made large investments in fairly crude ways of analyzing text, like just looking at keywords, looking mostly at quantitative methods, and large investments, and have woven these solutions into their back-end systems, right? So one of the things that's holding the breakthroughs back is that they have to get past that, and they have to revisit their commitment to those systems, because in fact they've already been disrupted. The quantitative approach is being surpassed by the qualitative and quantitative combination. It's easy for computers to count things, and it's easy for computers to count words and to use Boolean logic. This is what computers have always been extremely good at. This is very, very boring. What computers are now starting to get good at is to understand written human language, and that really changes everything. So, but if you're in this audience and you haven't yet made an investment in what is basically yesterday's technology, and now this is your opportunity to leapfrog some of those companies that may be now slower than you, maybe more reactive, may have a hard time understanding what their customers are saying. So there's a real opportunity here for those that are in the market now.
It's funny. I remember the early days when Google was just getting started, and I think a lot of people here would too. And I remember when Alta Vista was so huge. So why did they win? Why did Google win, Alta Vista lose? I think Alta Vista was trying to sell a preponderance of technology, arguing that it's harder than rocket science, and I'm going to try to make you understand it. Google said it just works. So I used to use the slide. I don't use slides anymore, so I can't stand PowerPoint. But one side was just every term you've ever come up with in the search and text analytics industry. I said, this is what we do when we talk about search. And on the right-hand side, this is the way the rest of the world sees search. It's just a Google logo and nothing else. I think what we're doing is we've become the Alta Vista of text analytics now. And I think one of the things we need to do is actually become Google. It's hard technology, that's true. It was all through data warehousing and data mining as well, back in those days. But they sold it because they sold it as a way to solve problems, and they made it as simple as they could possibly make it. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't have discussions at the minutia level about sentiment analysis and TF-IDF and everything else, but we shouldn't sell that. And I think it gets back to what you were saying, is that because we have such a compendium of little techniques all over the place that can be used at different times depending on context, we try to make it so that they have to understand what it is when it's put together. Well, they shouldn't. They're not buying the pieces of the car, they're buying the car. And I think that's what we need to do.
Great.
My industry is acceptance and compliance. A lot of it's regulated, so we have to make sure that it can be documented and backed up. All these analytics tools are great, but how do you go into a legal case and say, I didn't use 100 top attorneys to review all this data, I ran it through a computer? How accurate was that? And how do you combat against those questions and make it quantifiable? So I think it comes down to the individuals that are creating, starting from the domain and creating the databases within these corporations or marketing, and then down in my industry to the actual litigation professionals that are running the searches and the computers are learning from. So that's going to take a lot of experience and acceptance in that way. The DOJ right now, just in spring, Tracy Greer, the head of the litigation counsel there, just got on a panel and is going to release in a couple months that the DOJ wants to use text analytics, and they're putting some parameters in. It's going to be down to digital data. If you have documents that need OCR, optical character recognition, it's not text heavy, or even metadata text heavy, I should say. They know they can save a lot of money, and there's a lot of time and efficiency that can be saved here. But there's got to be parameters and guidelines put in place so that's used properly.
By the way, can everyone in the back hear? Okay. Yes. Okay, great. Sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I'll say that I think there's this kind of false dichotomy between very simple techniques like word counting and information retrieval and the kind of, thousands of graduate student labor hours that Carl mentioned. One of the things that's holding us back is that people aren't focusing on building tools for themselves. So one of the things we've done is we've built a lot of discovery tools that go through and try and look for unusual information laden patterns in the data. These kind of demons run in the background. Interestingly enough, the last thing it spit out was something called lamb's quarters. Right? Is that something for dinner? It turns out that lamb's quarters is a plant, and it's a common allergen that people are tested for. But the system can actually detect that this is something that a human should look at because it has a high information content. So I think one of the things that would help this field go is tools for developers to use to help in the discovery process.
That's it? Okay, great. Thank you, gentlemen. That was some very insightful answers there. So I think for our next round, we're going to go ask specific questions to the panelists. And I'm going to address a question to a panelist, but feel free, of course, if you want to chime in, put your thoughts into it as well. So George, as we all know, privacy is a primary concern in this field. So will data mining add more power to the institution? As we kind of suspect it will. Or will it help shift the power back to the individual? Where does it lie there in terms of privacy and text analytics? Pretty hot topic. Take your time.
It's obviously going to, as you said, empower the institution, to use your words, to go further with less data. So maybe use less broad brush techniques, which again may be useful to the other side of the equation. But once again, it's more powerful technology, which obviously has the dark side and positive aspects to it. So I don't know that there's any better way to frame that in reality.
And do you think, I guess there's these online companies popping up where you can go and try and do your own kind of search on your own identity and seeing what's been said about you and trying to mitigate that?
I don't think that has anything to do with text analytics. I think that's a whole different matter. And that's part of the problem is that privacy is and the things that lead to the problems there for people on the internet is very complex and very multidimensional, and text analytics is I think.
So just opting out in Google's not going to be enough? If you're European, by the way.
That's not going to be enough.
Exactly. Anyone else want to take a stab at that? Nope. Pass. Okay. I told you it was a hot topic. So I'm going off the Word doc here. So, Jeff, can you discuss personalized medicine versus individual privacy? Does that question make any sense to you?
I think so. What the notion is it worthwhile trading some information that you think of as private for a more accurate diagnosis? And I think most of us, if we were to be diagnosed better because some machine was going over our data, we would benefit from that. I think there's also a very odd thing. I don't know if any of you have seen your own medical records, but I encourage you to look at them. If you're a member of Beth Israel, you get online access to the things that your doctor has written about you. And one of the interesting things is that if you read it, you probably won't understand it, all right? Because you'll see lines like U/BSTRWNL, which says upper body strength within normal limits. One of the odd little things that this technology does is it actually, because it translates that data into structured form, it actually translates it into English first. So there's a chance that the technology may help you understand your own medical record.
Fascinating. Anyone else want to take a stab at that? Nope, good.
I'm just going to ask one thing. I'd be curious to know, because you're in the business, and we sort of inherently believe that's the case. We inherently believe that's the case for advertising and also for state, protection and everything else. But if we ask people in the crowd right now, if there was a system, we finally had a whole medical system in the country now where it had all of the information about you, all semantically searched and everything else. And yes, we had PII and PCI compliance and HIPAA compliance in there. If all of that was available, how many of you think that your privacy would be compromised? Or there was the risk of compromising your privacy would be greater? Yes, see? And how many of you think that you would get better medical care? Okay, see? I mean, if you're a politician trying to push this through, what do you do with that type of answer?
Well,
over to you, medical guy.
Sadly, that ship is sailed.
We know the politician in the group now.
Basically, one of the side effects of the whole healthcare action in Washington is that hospitals are being driven to adopt electronic medical records, and they're also being driven to share them in a good sense that if you see Dr. X, after seeing Dr. Y, that Dr. X knows about the things you just said. So it's happening already. And so I think the thing that needs to happen is people need to think about what kind of control they want out of that in terms of, what permission should be given as far as sharing medical data, because it's happening whether you want it to or not.
Andrew, I got one for you. So is data mining and text mining truly integrated? Should it be? And can you give us some examples?
So, I'm going to be biased based on our experience now in the Salesforce community, but this is, I think, a trend anyway. We talked about big data, and we've certainly seen in June, hundreds of millions of dollars being put into the database companies. Cloudera being the obvious one. Intel's putting a lot of money into that guy. So we know that there's an awful lot of information out there that is really centered around not being a distinction between structured and unstructured data. But we still think of the distillation of that information and the presentation of that distillation of information as very definitely BI versus search in many ways. And whether it's data mining or text mining, I think we do the same thing. And I think that's an outmoded concept. I think it's compartmentalizing where it no longer exists. It's like saying that the TV screen has absolutely nothing to do with the computer screen, so you'll never watch movies on your computer, you'll never play games on your TV, which of course we all know now today is nonsense, but 15 years ago. So I think what's happening, a good example is with our community. We spend an awful lot of time building search pages that look an awful lot like intelligent interactive reports. And in fact, we've had people tell us, can you please replace the reporting system as well? And I said, oh God, that's a whole different world. We just build search pages. And they go, I don't understand what you're saying. That's a report. It's an interactive live report. Yes, it is. And the search box on top is all fuzzy, wonderful search. And the filters on text fields are wonderful searches. But we don't tokenize drop-downs, and we don't tokenize gradient buttons and checkboxes. Yes, we have dynamic faceting on ground and side. They don't care the difference between the two of them. The actual mix between the two of them is actually what is really the advantage. There's an awful lot of literature out there that says BI looks backwards and it only answers when and where and how much or something. It doesn't answer why. There are an awful lot of statisticians out there who would disagree with any trend analysis they do, which are purely on numbers. Just ask any, weather, that's just a bad example, I guess, but weather predictions. But in any event, bringing text in is simply saying I can have a more complete picture of the data. Our first example from our speaker, that was all pure text analytics, but what did he see in the end? Good old-fashioned looking BI numbers. We put graphs and pie charts around, it was like a BI form. But the data came out of text analytics. I think we need to start positioning all of this as if it's all part of the same problem, part of the same solution.
Very good.
My stuff now.
So next question is for Amit. Speaking from experience, like one of the really hard problems in natural language parsing is figuring out context, right? So can search help us understand context and intent? And how can it improve it?
That's a very interesting question. What we are trying to do in our current company is analyzing semantically any page that the user is browsing and trying to understand the intent of the user. This combined with the cookie or other information that we have on the user, we try to correlate and predict what are the potential next actions that the user might do next, and that's the name of the product called ZoomNet, while keeping him on the page. So it is definitely the future, to my opinion, which is to understand intent. And it's definitely something that we investigate and it's very interesting. I want to tell you a different example from the previous company, which was a cyber product for the field of open source intelligence. One of the sub-products that we had is trying to scan social networks all the time and trying to find intent of people together in an area without permission and maybe to cause riots or stuff like that. There was a story of a girl that published that she has a birthday somewhere and she invited all her friends, but she ended up with like 4,000 people came to that area and it was a huge, huge riot. So the field of intent, to my opinion, is one of the strongest things that is possible to be done with text analytics and can contribute a lot in commercial business, and I just gave another example in the security.
Excellent. So those of us who are old enough to remember your Enron case? I know in my mind that was the first case where we're using e-discovery to figure out, what are all these people talking about and saying, and it was, I think the data set is still out there. It's a fascinating data set to mine for text analytics if you want a fun project and colorful language. Michael, the next question is for you, and complying with e-discovery requests. E-discovery is basically complying with these types of requests, and kind of comes back to a lot of what we've been talking about tonight. But is just pure text analytics good enough and accurate enough to do that?
like I said, it's funny you guys are talking about drop-down boxes and fuzzy searches. It's really who's building those searches and building those concepts in the beginning. That's what they're really interested in right now. Is do we have experienced individuals starting with the computer and it's learning from the individuals that know the cases the most. Text analytics, you talked about conversations in the Enron case, threading and understanding the concepts of the searches, but now text, relational terms and relational text that's coming back from all these different conversations, it's giving the attorneys a window into conversations and concepts they've never seen before. It's also deduping out information that's duplicated. We all built a PowerPoint. You guys built a PowerPoint tonight and present this. How many times has this been presented maybe to other companies, and what do you change? Maybe you change the slides, or you change the different names on the cover sheet, or a couple different things for the company. But that information would come back duplicative. But once you run text analytics against it, it will bring that information back and show you how many times it's there and what the changes were, and you can call that out. Like I said, it's saving the money for the client or the corporation or whatever.
And working in finance myself, I must say, when you mind those Wall Street firms, I'd say the language is pretty colourful, but mind that'd be interesting.
Financial documents, same thing. I mean, it happens across them as well. Text analytics really has to be, what we call it is a true managed review. It's getting involved with the data, with the case team, understanding the data, and taking a couple steps back and understanding where it came from.
Great. So listen, I've got a ton more questions, but I think it's going to be a lot more fun if we open up to the audience. Who wants to start off with a question? Let's see if you can shout it out. If you don't mind.
My name's Mike. I have a question. In healthcare, we have a lot of constraints around text analytics and other areas under the realm of big data regarding privacy and security. Do you see constraints coming either legal or regulatory towards the other areas, the other markets outside of healthcare? I'm thinking particularly of finance and retail.
We have, mainly it's really existing regulations like PII and PCI, and it's more of a concern in securing down data. They're okay with controlling who accesses it. They're not always sure that it's being secured properly from people getting in it. But there are interesting trends that come out that we don't realize, and we know about them. If you're doing some trend analysis on data and somebody's doing some search results and they notice a particular result coming up on top, a lot more than it should, and it might be, say, a merger or an acquisition that's not public yet within the company, but you're searching that company's name in your own intranet, it keeps coming up. That is actually a breach, because what you're doing is you're giving the person information in an inferred way, and they're going to make a decision on it, and that decision could be liable. So you have to be careful. It's not so much a black and white situation. It's when you start doing higher order analytics, you start seeing trends show up. People see those trends, and that becomes problematic. So we see it in the financial sector, especially around, not so much around the numbers, but we see it around the PII, PCI data.
Anyone else want to take that? Good. Next question. Towards the back there. Shout it out loud.
Yeah, sure thing. So the question is, once text analytics becomes something that's actionable, in which opportunities can be found? How soon before people start making ghost or dummy websites with, text analytics to sway behavior, and gamify or to play the analytic engines themselves, just the way other engines play?
That's a great question, because that happens right now in patent litigation. So patents, everybody's patenting something and trying to protect it, and they're finding out all different words and ways to phrase things to have a broader overview of their patent or protect it and have it unsearchable. So text analytics does bring back that dummy information, but at the same time, it's information we've never found. So it's really, like I said, it goes back to the leaders that are understanding the case, understand what they're looking for, giving the system that information. It goes out, finds information in relational terms, and it's almost like running a search with synonyms. You put agreements in, and there's several different types of terms that will come across a data set that you never would have thought of to build your search on list. So it's a great question, and it's actually happening right now.
Anyone else want to take that? Good. Next question. Back at the back again.
To what extent do you find your work in text analytics bleeding into natural language programming itself? Are you still really working at that sort of engineering kind of way, or are we starting to solve this problem of we're doing a different kind of computer programming that uses the English language in a different way?
I think it's a combination of both. I mean, you look at techniques that say, look, let me think of each word as a feature, all right, and you can build certain models of that. Then you can say, well, let me be a little bit more clever at that, and let me think of each verb noun combination as a thing, and think that of a feature. And you go higher than that and say, well, let me think of every written prescription as a feature, all right? So there's kind of a blending of low-level intelligence and kind of higher-order processing that kind of takes advantage of the strengths of both of those worlds, I think.
Yeah, the Luminoso solution has great API, which gets to the question. I don't think people in text analytics or natural language processing are trying to change the programming language to be such that it's using natural language. So I think that there's still a bridge between programmatic ways of achieving things and dealing with data structures. That hasn't changed, and there's really no reason for that to change quickly. So you're bridging between the programmatic and the classic data structure manipulation, which is basically working with numbers and lists and things, and the text analytics engine, which is definitely dealing with written human concepts and relationships between concepts and maps and graphs of terms and diagrams and so on. So there's a bridge between those two, and it's very exciting because you've got a data structure that surfaced through an understanding of written language. That's incredibly exciting. You can see an ordered list of n-grams that is coming from a 50,000 document corpus. That's incredible. The computer system would have never been able to have that data structure in its memory had it not been for the text analytics engine. So that as a programmer, that's a holy grail kind of thing. We're not, as a programmer, I've never heard of anyone trying to program, using natural language. So maybe I'm misinterpreting the question, but I think there's still that dichotomy.
That's only because you're not old enough to remember COBOL.
True that.
If you call a language pig, natural language is probably not the top of your list.
Very, very good point. All right, we have time for one last question. Who wants it? Man right there.
The question is about the personalized medicine you mentioned about it. So now, given that there is a great opportunity for the whole genome being sequenced for less than $1,000, it basically is a complete information about who and what kind of disease you're susceptible to. Right? Now, how exactly would text analytics help in the tension between the payers and the providers? And there are experiences where examples like Kaiser Permanente and IMA, where providers are also becoming payers. So what's the risk?
Yeah, I mean, the text analytics kind of contributes to that whole thing is very small. It turns out that almost all that genetic analysis is done by a sample is sent away to a distant laboratory and a letter comes back, a physical piece of paper comes back. And that physical piece of paper is then read into or typed into your medical record. So the job of text analytics is just to kind of recover the information that otherwise wouldn't be there, right? Now, once you've got that there, it's a completely separate question about how that's used and who has access to it. The text part is it's an accident almost that because that data is handled by a distant laboratory, not by a local laboratory, it's now part of the structured field. But once the kind of simple job of saying, okay, you've got a mutation in the 20 first exon of the JAK2 gene, that's kind of the text analytic part is done. Now everything else kicks in. And in some sense, like I said, the text part is just turning the unstructured data into structured data. Then all the same questions apply, whether it originated that way or not.
Great. All right. So I hope these gentlemen will stick around. So if you want to ask them more questions, feel free to do so if you can nab them. And I think we're going to wrap it up. So please give them a warm round of applause.